Welcome to SSI Meetup. Today we'll be talking about trust frameworks. Yesterday we had Drummond explaining what decentralized key management is and how that is relevant to SSI and self-sovereign identity overall. And today we will be talking about trust frameworks and how they fit into SSI. And as a special occasion, we have the opportunity today to have Julie Esser and Rick Cranston from MyCUID from the credit union industry, from the global credit union industry, with whom Drummond will be leading an interview today. They will explain us how they have implemented their own trust framework and how that works and how the experience was. And in the first part, Drummond will be talking about what trust frameworks are, how they work, and how they're relevant. And then we will see a real life example with Drummond, Julie, and Rick about how this gets implemented in real life. So this is pretty exciting. If we go to the second slide, we will just briefly review what this is about and why we're doing this. And basically, what we're trying to do at SSI Meetup is to empower global SSI communities, which means that companies, communities, organizations around the world can participate in the SSI movement and do this in an open way. And to do this in an open way, all the content we are creating is just being recorded in a video, but you will also get the slides in a SlideShare with a CC by SA license, which is basically an open source license, which basically means, like for today, where Drummond is sharing this presentation, where we have these guests with us from CULedger, that you just have to refer to SSI Meetup and say that you picked up these slides from Drummond and CULedger today, and then you can reuse them in whatever way you want, and hopefully you will be using them in productive ways to create your own communities around the world. So today we have Drummond, who will be talking first about trust frameworks, and then in the second half he will be interviewing Julie and Rick. And if you have any questions in between, please just intervene. On the first half, I will be interrupting Drummond if you have any questions for him. And in the second part, Drummond will be leading it. And if you have any questions, he will be asking those questions to Julie and Rick. So Drummond, please, just the first for you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Alex, and welcome everyone. Love being here on another one of these, and I'm particularly excited about this topic of trust frameworks and having Rick and Julie with us. Now, ironically, I'm actually going to start out by talking about verifiable credentials because I want to make sure everyone seeing this webinar understands what the trust framework is actually governing and why trust frameworks are moving into a whole new era here. So a little bit of review. This is, I'm actually going to use to explain verifiable credentials, which, as you see here, are a new form cryptographically verifiable digital credentials. And they are being standardized at W3C Verifiable Claims Working Group, which is about halfway through its charter. So it's only got less than a year left now to finish that work. So it's well along. And this diagram, which I've used in the previous webinars, of the self-sovereign identity model explains why self-sovereign identity, the heart of it, is verifiable credentials. Because in this model, you relate peer-to-peer with anyone else, and you don't have accounts with websites or identity service providers, you have connections. Everything is based on connections. And what you do with it when you establish a connection is you have a digital wallet, and you've got a set of credentials in there. Now, how do you get those credentials? You can have self-issued credentials you put in the wallet yourself. But if you want to say you're trusted by some other party, like you have a driver's license or you have a passport or you have a credit union membership, then you go to another peer, you form a connection, they issue you a credential after they verify you in whatever ways they need to do. And then when you go and you need to prove some aspect of your identity, that's when you present the credential to another peer to verify. And this is the heart of, again, self-sovereign identity. It's all about issuing and accepting digital credentials. And the verifiable credentials is how we're standardizing this. Now, this is also, and by the way, when you share a credential, actually when it's issued, it's digitally signed with a public key that is on a blockchain. It has a decentralized identifier as address. And when you present a credential to be verified, you also digitally sign it. And that's verified with your public key on a blockchain. So that's why blockchain technology enables this whole new infrastructure of verifiable digital credentials. Now, I want to go a little bit deeper into this because when we start talking trust frameworks, these the three key roles in the verifiable credentials ecosystem it's just critically to understand them. You've got, for every digital credential you will have in your wallet, you have an issuer. Now, as I said, if you can self-issue credentials. A business card is a good example. You type up your own business card, you go to printer, you have it made up. Nobody issued that to you, you issued it yourself. You can do that at verifiable credentials, and it's self-signed in that case. However, if you're going to get a credential from someone else, again, a passport, a driver's license, a banking credential, a membership, an employee ID card, the issuer is going to be another party, and they're going to sign that credential, and they're going to sign it with the the private key for their decentralized identifier, which others can verify on the ledger. Now, you form that connection, they issue that credential to you, the holder, and it goes into your digital wallet. And now, before you present it to a verifier, you form a connection with the verifier, and then you will countersign that credential. And the verifier at that point can verify your signature, can verify the issuer signature, and know that that credential is valid. This is the core infrastructure of all of self-sovereign identity. Now, in order to make sure we have it covered for the points coming up and as we talk trust frameworks, I want to point out in sovereign, the sovereign ecosystem specifically, we go 2 steps further for privacy. And the first one is that all the connections in sovereign by default use pairwise unique DIDs. So you don't have one DID that you share and all your issuers use it for your credentials. You will have pairwise unique DIDs for each of your connections. And this way you can't be correlated on the basis of the DIDs you're sharing or the public and private key pairs behind them. The second thing is that the credentials in sovereign all use zero knowledge proof cryptography. And therefore, when the credential is issued, you actually share what's called a link secret with the issuer, so that they use that to give you this encoded credential from which you can produce proofs whenever you go to a verifier. And those proofs allow you to prove anything you need to about that credential without, if you don't want to or you don't need to, revealing the actual data. Classic example used, if you needed to take a driver's license and you're just going into a bar, you need to prove you're of legal age to drink, you can share just the proof that you were over the age required in that state or province, and nothing else. And they don't need to see anything else. So with this baseline, let's now talk trust frameworks. And of course, the very first question I get about that term always is, what is it? What is a trust framework? What does it actually mean? And this is the nice, concise definition I like to use, right? It's a package of business, legal, and technology rules that a group, any size, from like a single company or a church or a community could use, all the way to a global trust framework. And we'll talk about some examples here in a minute. So now, to make it sure it sticks, this package, Dazza Greenwood at MIT invented this acronym. It's a BLT sandwich. So whenever you think about a trust framework, think, okay, you look for the bacon, the lettuce, and the tomatoes. The bacon, it's got to have the business policies and business rules. It's got to be tied to the legal infrastructure, and then it actually, whatever it needs to interoperate technically is specified in the trust framework too. So it's a package of all those things together. Now, the easiest way to understand the concept when you think about it is what's a trust framework we interact with almost every day? A credit card network. What's behind the credit card that makes it actually work when you stick it in, you swipe it or you I guess tap it now or slide it in, is there's an entire, it's called the card scheme, that actually specifies not only technically what goes on to take that credit card and verify it with your bank and authorize it with the acquiring bank all the way around, but there are the legal rules, for instance, liability and insurance and the ties into the regulations and the various, in the case of Visa, international regulations governing financial interactions. But there's also the business rules, right? What's the, who gets paid for what, and how is liability allocated? So all of those things add up to a trust framework. And where we're going now is we're moving from physical credentials to digital credentials, and every single one, every credential that is going to be used by more than just the issuer that gave it to you needs a trust framework behind it. That's why you can think of it as any digital credential, again, that's going to be used by more than just the same party that issued it. The flip side of that credential is a trust framework. And this is why with SSI, we're going to see an explosion of trust frameworks. We're going to see, there's been maybe a dozen developed in the last 8 or 10 years. I think now we're going to see literally over the next couple of years, we're going to go from tens to hundreds to thousands, and eventually tens of thousands, millions of trust frameworks, because they're going to underlie every digital credential that we're sharing. Now, why? I want to really reinforce why are we going to see this explosion now? Because trust frameworks in the past have had to define everything about how they work. Right? Here's the whole technical infrastructure we're going to use to establish trust online. Here's all the legal regulations, and then the whole business model. Whereas with self-sovereign identity, much of that, pretty much the whole technical infrastructure is already defined. And so when you come along with a trust framework, all you're having to do is basically say, oh, okay, which issuers are going to issue what credentials under what policies? And therefore, the verifiers know what they're relying on. So you've made it much simpler and lighter weight for what the trust framework has to define. Now, I quickly want to cover the sovereign trust framework and explain why sovereign has a specific trust framework. So for most folks are probably familiar with the SSI meetup, probably have heard of sovereign, purpose-built blockchain that's designed from the ground up, starting about 2.5 years ago, to be a global public utility. What many folks may not know is from the outset, it was designed to be both a public utility and an associated trust framework designed for one and only one purpose, for self-sovereign identity. And this trust framework includes a legal agreement to every what we call steward that runs a node of the sovereign public ledger. And this is a snapshot, and I say snapshot because this isn't even pulled. There are actually over 40 stewards have been approved at this point. But this is a snapshot of some of the different companies that have signed that agreement. They're official signatories to the sovereign trust framework as what we call founding stewards. And I'll have you note here, the 4 at this whole second row are all credit unions. And we'll be talking a lot more about credit unions. They were one of the first industries to recognize the potential for sovereign and embrace it. And that's what will lead us into the second half of our talk here today. So the Sovereign Trust Framework is produced by the Sovereign Trust Framework Working Group. It's an open public working group, open to anyone to participate. You don't have to be a steward. You don't have to be a technical expert. However, we do have, at this point, over 30 experts from all around the world, from many different industries. We have top attorneys in both finance, liability certification, but also GDPR and e-privacy, of course. And then we've got technologists and architects and folks from the certification industry. I should point out 3 of the world's top CAs, certificate authorities, InfoCert in Europe, DigiCert in the US, and CertiSign in Brazil are sovereign stewards, and all of them are active on the Sovereign Trust Working Group because of the work we're doing to define this. And the first Sovereign Trust Framework was published in July of last year. That is what the network is operating under. The network could not go live until the trust framework was done, and the initial founding stewards, there were 10 that went live last July, all had to sign and be parties legally to the trust framework before the network went operational. So here's what's special about the Sovereign Trust Framework. From the very outset, recognizing what I've been explaining to you here in this webinar, it was designed to say this is not the be-all and end-all of digital trust. This, in fact, is just the foundation, just the basic ground floor. In fact, I use this analogy constantly. It's like this very, very thin Lego baseboard. I had 2 boys, so I had mountains of Legos in my house. And it's designed only to serve that purpose, because all of the actual trust, and for instance, there's only some very, very, very generic digital credentials that will be in the sovereign trust framework. Almost anything that would actually end up in your wallet is going to be a plug-in, or what we call a domain-specific trust framework will cover that. So if anything from, even passports would be a domain-specific trust framework put together by the governments around the world. Driver's licenses in the US would end up being a US driver's license trust framework. There are many, many different examples of domain-specific trust frameworks. In fact, I wanted to talk about them briefly before introducing the first one. It's going to be the second half of our talk. So again, a domain-specific trust framework is where the real meat of the sandwich is. It is a self-sovereign identity trust framework that will get specific now about, okay, which issuers issue what credentials under what policies in order to achieve some desired level of trust. And again, if you're literally issuing a credential just to come back and log into your website, or to use a particular app, it's a very narrow credential. It's like a loyalty card that might only work with one coffee shop, for example. Then you don't need a trust framework. The trust framework is inherent in what you're doing. But as soon as you issue a credential, even a loyalty card that could be used at multiple different businesses, or at all of the coffee shops within one town, then you need for a group to cooperate, and you need a trust framework, maybe a very light one, or you can go all the way to the other end of the global credit card network and need something very heavy. But in any case, that's why they're needed, and the very first ones are in process right now. The Sovereign Trust Framework Working Group has some of us that are either volunteers or consultants on the domain-specific trust frameworks that are under development right now. And the first one is the subject of the second half of our webinar. It's from the organization is known as CULedger, and the digital credential is MyCUID. And to introduce this first, just very high level, CULedger is a consortia that was created by the credit union industry to provide blockchain solutions to its 235 million members worldwide. And it was established, well, we'll get more of the story here shortly, but the work is almost 2 years old. MyCUID is the first initiative coming from them, and it is a global digital credential credit union membership. And here, and there's the logo here. So here to tell us about
sorry to interrupt, Drummond. We just have one question before we get more into the interview mode. Corin, He's asking, will domain-specific trust frameworks be where schemas be defined and agreed upon?
Oh, yes. Short answer is yes. In fact, even the long answer is yes, but it's much deeper there. I do believe the vast majority of schemas will be established by domain-specific trust frameworks. There may be some that are so broad that they are actually part of the generic trust frameworks, like the Sovereign Trust Framework. But the Sovereign Trust Framework is not really for schema development. Yes, almost all of it will happen in domain-specific trust frameworks. And good point, Alex. Are there any other questions before I go over to finish this introduction?
This seems to be it for the time being.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so to talk about CULedger and MyCID, I'd like to introduce Rick Transon, who is the Chief Operating Officer now of CULedger, but was also one of the first people in the whole industry to get started and see the vision for self-sovereign identity, and was there at the very first meeting that I had that involved sovereign. And so it's a great pleasure to have him here today. And he's joined by Julie Esser, who's the Chief Engagement Officer and the person driving MyCUID from a product standpoint. So first, let me just say welcome, Rick and Julie.
Thank you, Drummond.
Thanks, Drummond.
So I'd like to start out. The rest of this is we're just going to interview you, so folks listening to the webinar can get a sense of, okay, so what is actually happening here in the credit union industry to take this step of defining not just the first digital credential of credit union membership, but the trust framework for. So maybe let's start out by just can you give us some background about how did CULedger come together to become to develop blockchain solutions for the credit union industry?
Rick, do you want to start with that question?
Well, Julie, why don't you let me jump in? Yeah, I'll jump in. Drummond, can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're clear now.
Okay, great. Well, I'll jump in. Julie, you can follow me. I'll mention a little bit of the background. Really, this initiative started for me almost 3.5 years ago. It's the company itself started about a year ago, but we have been pioneering this thinking along with Drummond and the team from Evernim now for a number of years. It started out as an initial consortia. In fact, one of the world's largest consortia. We had 70 organizations participating, credit union support organizations. We had large credit unions. We had small credit unions. We had credit unions from north of the border participating as well. And all contributing basically expense money to explore this technology and how it could really support an entire industry. Julie, what am I missing?
You're spot on, Rick.
All right. Well, and I know it took a while for for you to educate the credit unions, interact with. I don't know how many were involved, but then it came together. So it's probably good for folks to understand, since credit unions are a special form of organization. They're nonprofits that are serving as financial institutions. What is the actual form of CULedger, and how did you decide on that as an organization that's going to serve the credit union industry with blockchain solutions?
I'll take on that one, Rick. For CULedger and for credit unions themselves, credit unions are financial services cooperatives. And so they operate based on the cooperative principles. For credit unions themselves, we're a very small piece in the total financial services ecosystem. But credit unions were formed on the basis of trust and loyalty. So when credit unions were first established, a group of individuals came together to find ways that they could lend money to each other. And so those principles have grown into what credit unions serve now in terms of operating principles. And so as credit unions grow, the whole issue of relevancy is always at the top of everyone's mind, right? We've already seen the likes of Toys R Us and Sears, Xerox, just to name a few, that really didn't look into the future. And we're doing that for credit unions, and this is one of those ways that we're doing it. So the president of the National Trade Association for Credit Unions, Jim Nussel, just recently talked about cooperative superpowers. And I like to use that phrase because this is definitely an initiative that reins in the cooperative superpowers of credit unions and industry providers in building the future infrastructure for credit unions.
Oh, that's fantastic. So give us, personalize it for us a little bit. How did each of you come to join the CULedger management team? What was your journey?
I'll jump in first. As I mentioned earlier, I've been working on the initiative for 3.5 years, and we brought the company to fruition. We were lucky enough to be able to hire a gentleman as our CEO, a guy by the name of John Ainsworth, who is a former EVP of North American markets for MasterCard worldwide. In fact, Julie and I hired him. We hit it off, developed a very good relationship with John, and John said, "Rick, why don't you join the team?" And I was excited to be able to have the opportunity to do that. So for me, it is a culmination of several years worth of pushing, prodding, educating, and conversing with credit union leadership from across the country. And so that's really my short story. Julie?
Sure. I came from 30 years of credit union experience. My entire career has been spent in this industry. I'm passionate about it. I worked that entire time with the Credit Union National Association, which is the largest trade association that serves all credit unions nationally. I'm very involved in this project for the last 2 years as well, to some extent.
Exactly. So both of you were you know, sort of had a running start once it got going. So I suppose the next question that many people would have here is, you know, most people associate, you know, blockchain and distributed ledger technology, of course, with, you know, with cryptocurrency and finance. How is it that the initial focus or the first thing you decided to tackle at CULedger was self-sovereign identity?
I'll take a stab at that. The reason we take that approach is because SSI is absolutely foundational to really every interaction, every transaction that occurs between a credit union and a member. And the second part is important as well, between a member and a credit union. It is the foundational aspect of what we are trying to accomplish. In fact, I'll mention this. It's all about knowing who you're talking to for us. Can you prove it? Can you trust the proof? And can you do that in less than 5 seconds? We actually had a conversation recently with an organization that is a like organization for the banking side, where their head of identity actually said the very same thing. You can't have payments unless you understand who you're talking to. So that's why we take the focus that SSI is where we start this process. There are additional pillars, additional solutions, additional applications, but SSI must come first. Julie, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Just to add to that, our first working proof of concept was using MyCUID in a call center environment. So why that was important is because we've seen a rise in call center fraud in the industry, to whereas, you know, there's one loss in every 895 calls, and that's only growing. And so, you know, and the user experience itself is pretty clunky, to say the least. You know, when you call into your financial institution, you're bombarded with a series of questions that you get asked before you can actually conduct a transaction. And so that is the other, you know, there are other channels as well that we'll be focusing on, like call in, drive in, log in, but we'll be focusing first on the call center channel.
And that sounds like it already starts to explain how you came up with the idea of, you know, of the MyCUID credential. But can you give us more background, and why did you decide to focus on a particular, you know, digital credential for the credit unions, and what do you see that credential representing for the credit unions and their members?
Julie, you want to take that one first?
Sure. I mean, we talk about MyCUID, we talk about connect, secure, and include. We want to keep the trust between the credit union member and the credit union strong. It's historically always been very strong, and we want to use this tool as a way to maintain that. Secure from the standpoint of creating a secure connection with the credit union with every interaction, like Rick just mentioned. And to include is to make sure that every consumer that has an opportunity can establish a financial relationship with their credit union. Rick mentioned, and actually you mentioned too, Drummond, about the worldwide international scope of this initiative. We look at 2 billion consumers around the world that don't have a financial relationship, and half of them don't have a relationship because they don't have an identity. And so we call this MyCUID with a purpose to some extent as well, because we want to try and change the nature of consumers to be able to have a financial relationship with their credit union.
Fantastic. So the would it be accurate to say that with the MyCUID credential, you are, and the trust framework we'll talk about more in a minute, you're wanting to standardize what it means or a way to digitally represent that you are a member of a credit union, and you've gone through the process of signing up and being accepted in that credit union for membership.
Right. The industry is very regulated in that regard. There's a lot of rules and regulations around making sure that you know who you're talking to from a know your customer perspective. And so credit unions are in a perfect position to escalate and set the bar higher. I like to call it the gold standard for the industry. You know, we have overcome a lot of obstacles as it relates to the financial crisis a number of years ago, when credit unions didn't get involved in predatory lending. You know, we really want to establish, you know, a higher standard for the industry overall.
Fantastic. So for a credit union member, and maybe Julie, I know since this is your prime bailiwick, what do you see as the primary benefits initially of the MyCUID credential and growing over time? What would a credit union member? You've talked about, you know, the call-in process. Maybe even you might even step through how will the call-in identification process change if a credit union member has MyCUID?
Well, if a credit union member has MyCUID installed on their phone, they would just simply call the call center, and the member service representative would note it in their user interface of their call center application that the user does have a MyCUID, and they would issue them a notification to accept the transaction. And the user then would receive some type of notification in the form of a text message to say, you know, Mr. Reed, are you, you know, would you like to move forward with conducting a transaction with ABC Credit Union? And it's as simple as you indicating on your phone, yes, allow, or if it's not you, you simply deny it and the transaction stops. But once you accept that alert, that notification, then you can go ahead, conduct the business as you intended to do so.
Without any other, you know, you don't have to go through 20 questions or knowledge-based authentication or all that.
Absolutely. Yeah, those knowledge-based 20 questions are gone.
So we talked about using in a call-in application. What about in the other ways that a member might interact with their credit union? Do you see it applying to the rest of those?
We see it applying to every possible interaction that a credit union might have with their members. So whether that is conducting transactions when they walk into the branch, or they drive into the branch, or when they log into their internet banking platform. There's a lot of other utilities relating to authenticating for loans, possibly, and the use of smart contracts that are all part of distributed ledger. Onboarding, even new membership applications and things of that nature can be done using MyCUID.
Perfect.
Possibility
now,
endless.
You bet. So, so clearly it's going to be a benefit to the members, and you can see that's already a need, you know, for the credit unions and their executives to want to push forward. But what are the benefits from a business standpoint? What are the credit unions as you know, business organizations get out of MyCUID?
I think, you know, one of the
go
ahead, Rick.
Go ahead, Julie.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to add a couple of things. One, we believe that identity is really when it comes to a relationship, it allows you to have the most intimate relationship possible with your member or your customer. It all starts with identity. So we quite honestly believe that SSI allows a credit union to retain the best of who they are, and that means having a relationship with your member. That's a critical piece. Then the other piece we think is very important is the removal of friction. Drummond alluded to that earlier, as did Julie. That word friction is rampant when it comes to financial institutions, not only in the credit union industry, but in the banking space as well. On average, that friction in terms of identifying who you're talking to generally translates to, at the quickest, maybe 30 seconds, but at the on the other side of that spectrum, and this is very normal as well, it could be 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes before you're identified. Only from the financial institution to the member. We're not even talking about the member or the customer to the financial institution. So removal of friction is huge.
And just to add to that, just huge security and fraud benefits that the credit union will receive with the use of MyCUID and our broader distributed ledger technology.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Now, what's your vision for how MyCUID might be used by a member outside of the credit union industry? Is this a credential that will have value to the member in other interactions?
Absolutely. You know, the whole notion of self-sovereign identity, it allows the consumer to be able to own and control that identity, right? And it can never be taken away. So in terms of other utilities or other use cases that a member can use that for, if they have other credit union relationships, that's a potential opportunity. Even outside the financial services industry, you know, there are relationships with healthcare, there was education, with utilities, government, retail. The possibilities go on and on. But then you can also think about how you can use it one-on-one, just interacting with peers. And then that list expands further. So that's what makes this so exciting, in my opinion, is just the ability to be able to use and control. And not only that, Drummond, I am sick of writing down username and passwords. I don't know about you, but my list is getting longer and longer and longer, and I can't wait to throw out the book that I have.
Yes, I mean, believe me, my wife actually asked me again last night at dinner. She's like, "You're doing these webinars. How soon can I get rid of this book of passwords that she had to bring with us on this trip?" So totally understand that. Rick, did you have anything else you wanted to add there?
Yeah, let me add that from a strategy vantage point, we see, I call it a meet in the middle strategy. So the credit union industry has truly caught the vision. We are all in when it comes to the implementation of SSI and subsequent solutions from there. But there's another piece to this. You might be asking yourselves, well, that's just the credit union industry. What about the rest of the world? Well, I think the other side of the bridge building that's occurring here, when you see organizations like IBM participating, not only with CULedger, but with Sovereign and the whole notion of SSI, you see organizations like Microsoft that are now involved. You see major card companies that are now involved. You see information coming out of the World Economic Forum that occurred just this past year that is all focused on the implementation of SSI. We think SSI has just really taken off, is gaining tremendous traction across the world. We're excited to be a part of it.
Fantastic. Okay, well, let's and Alex, let me know if there are questions coming up. I have a few more, and then we'll jump into open questions. So maybe let's try and finish that out. So let's moving into the whole question now of the domain-specific trust framework that you've decided to create, the MyCUID trust framework. knowing that the technical levels of that, the technical policies are the easy part. I mean, it's not necessarily trivial to say, well, what actually will be the claims or attributes in a MyCUID credential, but I think most folks that are familiar with that would say, well, they're the things required for KYC in a lot of places, and they're definitely technical details. But I suspect the biggest part of your job is the other two parts of the BLT sandwich, the business and legal policies. And I know you're early in the process, but tell me a little bit about the process you're going to be going through to actually craft those and get the credit unions on board to produce the first version of the MyCUID trust framework.
Well, I'll take a crack at that first, and then Julie, please weigh in. We are very lucky in the sense that we have a template that is in front of us. It's the Sovereign Trust Working Group. So that group actually provides us with a roadmap to moving this forward. As Drummond already mentioned, you really can't have MyCUID unless you have a trust framework. You have to have agreement from within an industry. What we're trying to put together looks a lot like what's happening on the sovereign side of things in terms of what's happening on that trust framework. We will be engaging an entire industry using groups of credit unions from our early adopters to participate, leadership from those organizations joining us in developing what the BLT looks like, the business, legal, and technology rules. The objective here is to make sure that when an interaction or a transaction occurs, we all trust that it's righteous. That's a critical component. It can't be one credit union. It has to represent an entire industry. And so that's one of the challenges that we have today. Thankfully, we are working with some of the leading professionals when it comes to establishing trust frameworks in the entire world. So we are feeling extraordinarily blessed in that sense, and feel like we have a real opportunity to do something that is long-lasting and legacy-based.
Outstanding. Julie, anything you want to add there?
I was just going to say, we're just starting to get that party started. And just 2 weeks ago, we met with our investor group, that's where we introduced the concept of trust framework and what needs to be done. So we're just getting started on this initiative. I'm sure we have a long road ahead of us, but it's exciting nonetheless for the reasons that Rick had already shared.
Outstanding. So maybe we'll close up just my set of questions by asking, so you're starting the process now. What can you share what your initial objective is? I mean, how long until MyCUID credentials are actually going into credit union members' wallets, digital wallets?
Sure, I can start and Rick can add to this. We are planning on conducting a set of pilots with some of our credit unions and also who are investors, and also some of our industry partners later this summer. And then we're targeting to have commercial availability of MyCUID at the end of first quarter next year.
Fantastic.
I'll add to.
So it's coming. Rick, go ahead.
I'll add to that, Drummond. We have a big goal ahead of us. We are shooting for what we lovingly call March to 1 million. We are, as a goal, we are hoping for 1 million enrollments in MyCUID by the time 2019 rolls around. As Julie mentioned, we want to have pilots up and operational with 110 million members in the domestic U.S. We think that's a very achievable goal, and so that's what we're shooting for. It always scares people when we say March to 1 million. It's a big goal. It's an aggressive goal, but we are excited about it because we believe it creates not only a tipping point for the credit union industry, but when it comes to SSI, we think it will potentially create a tipping point worldwide.
And that summarizes beautifully, I think, Rick, the reason that I wanted to have the two of you join me in this discussion on trust frameworks and where you're going, because I do very much agree with you. I mean, and Alex, and I hope some of our listeners will realize, oh wow, you know, we're talking about putting 1 million of these MyCUID credentials in the hands of credit union members. And yes, it's only the very tip of the iceberg of the 235 million credit union members worldwide, but still you can start to see how fast it can grow from there as the various different, you know, merchants, websites, verifiers around the world go, oh, there is now a standard digital credential for credit union membership. And you could go to, you know, any site that says, oh, I'll accept that if you want to have, you want to come and register and verify with me and get rid of your username and password and have much stronger authentication. It's very exciting. Alex, we're mindful of the time here. Want to make sure to leave time for questions from folks that are attending the webinar. So
there are no other questions so far, but I have 2-3 questions if it's okay to ask them. I wanted to ask Rick and Julie, what is the legal structure that you've been using to set up CULedger? I mean, how is it owned by the different credit unions in the USA?
Sure, I can answer that, and Rick can join in as well. So from a governance structure, we set up as a private equity funding round initially. We have set up 3 classes of ownership. Our Class A ownership, which is primarily owned by credit unions and wholly owned CUSOs of credit unions. And CUSOs in the credit union world stands for Credit Union Service Organization. These are for-profit subsidiaries that credit unions established for this purpose, for either investing in other activities or providing services to a group of owners or expanding services outside their ownership to more credit unions nationally. So that is our largest class, and again, that will CULedger will be majority owned by this class, which consists of credit unions. Class B is established for founding members. So the Mountain West Credit Union Association, its for-profit subsidiary, and CUNA, or the Credit Union National Association, or its for-profit subsidiary, CUNA Strategic Services, are considered founding members and close out that class. And then the third class of ownership is kind of for anyone else that wants to participate. So other CUSOs, or credit union service organizations, other associations, other for-profit entities that are interested in becoming owners of CULedger will have that opportunity to do that in that class.
Okay, great, thank you. Rick, you wanted to mention anything about that too?
There's only one other build that I would offer to Julie's comments, and that is that we have restricted the amount of shares that any single organization could purchase, and that restriction is a maximum of 3. The reason for that is we wanted to make sure no single large organization within the credit union industry could swoop in and buy a dominant share of the existing share offerings.
Okay. In terms of how this initiative from the credit union compares to banking initiatives in the USA or around the world, then how do you think it compares? Because I mean to me it seems like a very advanced initiative and very forward-looking. But I mean, how do you see CULedger in comparison to what the banking industry is doing on a global scale?
I'll mention something, and then Julie, please chime in. What we know is that well, let me put it this way. I believe we're correct in saying there is no other initiative focused on SSI as the foundational aspect to what they're trying to accomplish. I think I'll reiterate again, from our vantage point, that's where the problem starts. So the only way you fix a problem is to start at the beginning in terms of knowing who you're talking to. And so I'm not aware of any other initiative in any other vertical that starts with first knowing who you're talking to as the initial application or solution. In terms of the banks, there's clearly a lot that's been happening in R3, for example. I think they are now beginning to understand, from what I can read and what I hear from them, that SSI is a growing need. So I think we're probably further ahead than they are on this particular front. They're further ahead of us on several other aspects of what they're trying to do with Corda. But we feel pretty confident that we're very different in how we think about what should be done first.
Awesome, thank you. Julie, you wanted to mention anything else?
No, I don't think there's anything more I can add to that, other than, from a much broader perspective, that's what really gets me excited to come to work every day, is knowing just how far ahead credit unions are, this industry is in this space. It's exciting to see that recognition come through for our industry. It's certainly going to help our little industry build leverage. And that is something that we wanted to do when I first talked about relevancy and owning our future and making a difference. I mean, CULedger simply does all of those things for credit unions and then some, and their members. And that's what gets me excited to come to work every day.
Awesome. I have two more questions for you. One is, how can international credit unions outside of the United States participate in this? Was this something exclusive to the United States?
In terms of investment, it is exclusive to U.S. credit unions. However, we realized, we mentioned this is an international initiative. And so we will be expanding in other international markets. How we were going to do that, we haven't quite really formulated our plan for that quite yet, but there's certainly a lot of countries that have expressed interest with us in wanting to support MyCUID. And so that we'll be looking more at those markets closely in 2019. We're also going to be participating in the World Council of Credit Unions International Conference here in a couple weeks in Singapore. And so that we'll be able to expand our message into other credit unions that don't necessarily hear our message outside of the U.S.
Awesome.
The only thing I would add, the only thing I would add to that is MyCUID is really intended to be, in our view, the world's first global digital credential. That I think puts a cap on it.
One final question that I had is about what kind of SSI technologies have you been looking at before you decided to go ahead with what you're doing right now?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. Can you ask me one more time, please?
What other SSI technologies did you look at, or did you consider before deciding with the current framework that you've chosen?
I'll be honest, we did not look at others. We went with true SSI, and from our vantage point, Sovereign is still the only one out there that really fits the requirements for the credit union industry. Julie?
I don't have, yeah, Rick's exactly right. I mean, we certainly looked at products. We investigated other types of products. But the more we dug under the covers, we realized that, like Rick said, Sovereign is truly SSI. You know, others may make those claims, but when you look more deeply into those products, you realize that might not be the case.
Okay, awesome. Drummond, I covered my questions. There have been other questions coming up, so if you want, I don't know if you want to bring up something else you had in mind.
No, I'm Alex, very, very happy. I want to thank Rick and Julie for joining us today and sharing their journey in the creation of MyCUID and the MyCUID trust framework. I guarantee you, as we move down that, and of course, they have been working with the members of the Sovereign Trust Framework Working Group, which is it's been a great engagement and so much more to do. So I think once that trust framework is out and published, Alex, there'll be another webinar in there to cover, you know, lessons learned and how it's moving out there. And I would look forward to that very much. And as always, if you're the CULedger, very easy to find, CULedger.com. If I realize I didn't actually put in a URL for the Sovereign Trust Framework, anyone wants to look at that, you can Google Sovereign, SOVRIN Trust Framework. It is the first thing that will come up, page on the website. And there's also a link to the Sovereign Trust Framework Working Group page, which I said, remind everyone, it is open. If you find yourself intrigued by this whole thing and want to get involved, just come visit us there, and or you know, email or tweet me directly, and we'll be happy to engage you. So thank you very much for hosting this, Alex.
Awesome. No, so thank you very much, Rick. Thank you very much, Julie, and thank you,
Alex.
Thank you for your time. I'll be preparing the recording and the PowerPoint slides, so that everyone can check this, and I'll share it with you too. And please, everyone who is joining us today, if you're interested in learning more about SSI, you can join us in the newsletter that you have on the website, Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and we have a Telegram channel too. And next week, Wednesday, we will be talking about did auth with Marco Sabadello, where he will be explaining that component. And the week after that, or in 2 weeks, we will be talking about registrations. Daryl is just saying thanks, big thanks. So thank you, Daryl, for joining us, and thank you, everyone. And everyone who's interested in DID-Auth, we will be talking about that next week, Wednesday, and I'll be sending out invitations for you to join that session. So thank you very much, Drummond, Rick, and Julie.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, Alex.